Working Cows Podcast, episode 164.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. It's Clay Conry, host of the Working Cows Podcast, here with another episode for you, powered by the Global Ag Network, and really excited today to be joined by Kathy Voth and Tip Hudson. Kathy, of course, is the one of the minds behind onpasture.com. She's been there cranking out great content and giving people a platform to share their voices on all things pasture related, and really appreciate all that she's done there to build that platform. And then also first time guest to the Working Cows Podcast, Tip Hudson. Very much appreciate his platform there at the Art of Range podcast and what he is doing there. And this is kind of a follow-up to last week's episode 163, where we shared our CSSRM, Colorado section for the Society of Range Management webinar that we all three participated in, and kind of wanted to follow up with them and talk a little bit with them about that discussion. So thanks to the Colorado section for the Society of Range Management for all that, for all the work that they did to put that together and give that platform to the people to see that content, and really excited today to follow up with Tip and Kathy. So Kathy, Tip, thanks for joining me today on the Working Cows Podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Good to be back.
Yeah, welcome back. Yeah, for sure. So we had the opportunity to share the webinar platform that the Colorado section for the Society of Range Managers put together, and I really enjoyed both of your presentations. And when I was thinking that we were going to have an opportunity to interact a little bit longer on the back end, one of the questions that I had been thinking about a lot in that regard was what, I always talk about, or I always get asked to talk about, what have I learned in the process of building Working Cows? And, for me, I always start out by saying I've learned everything, because I didn't know anything about holistic management. I didn't know anything about a different way of looking at cows. I grew up around cows, but I just, a lot of that stuff I had not sought to take in myself because it wasn't all that interesting to me growing up. And then when it became interesting to me, I kind of unleashed my ravenous curiosity and started to call people and ask them questions. And so I've learned everything through this process, but you guys have more time in the business than I do. And you've also had different educational backgrounds than I have had. And so I guess I'd just like to hear, what have you guys learned in the process of building the online communities that you have built? And I guess we'll start with Kathy.
Oh, I was going to start with Tip.
Yeah.
I was hoping we'd start with Kathy because I'm putting stuff together.
I see you, Tip, so you can go ahead.
Yeah, that's a good question. I've heard some other folks say that all research is me search, and I'm not really doing research, but as somebody who's committed to lifelong learning, mostly just by my own interest, and as an extension professional whose job it is to get information out to people, I've come to think a little bit differently about information in general and getting stuff out to people as well. I don't know, a couple of things. I feel like rangeland, what attracted me to rangeland science was that it's more integrated by nature. I started at the University of Idaho in wildlife biology, and having grown up in Arkansas, I had not heard of rangeland science, but it was more, I heard about it in an introductory class, natural resources program, and it was more what I thought I was interested in. I was interested in managing whole landscapes for human benefit. And I saw in range science really all of that, trying to integrate soils and plants and animals, livestock, people, whole ecosystems, all of that. And I think that lends itself well to a more community-oriented science. And I'm aware that the rangeland profession has some ways to go there, but I do think you see that more in range science than in other, even other natural resource disciplines that tend to be a little bit harder, say like forestry or something, because range is dealing with whole ecosystems and people and more marginal economics. I think there's a lot more room for even scientists to admit that there's probably things about the real world that they don't know that ranchers and others who spend their lives immersed in it sense and perceive accurately, even if they can't define all of the causation behind it. And that attracts me. And so in terms of outreach, I think Wayne Rasmussen is one of the founders of the SARE program, Sustainable Ag Research Education. And I read a quote from him one time, might have been part of some documentation about SARE, where he said that the universities are towers of excellence surrounded by seas of non-communication. And while people may quibble about how excellent some of the universities are, I do think there's a lot of valid, useful information that gets produced that doesn't get out. And of course, that's the whole purpose of the extension system across the country. That's my job. So coming all the way back around, I felt like with a little bit of effort on my part, I could expand my own learning process and put that out there for other people to benefit from. We have all of these experts on both sides of the academic fence, people that are in academia and outside of academia that can and need to learn from each other. And I thought broadcasting recorded conversation in sort of like long form journalism, in depth on a topic would be useful. And it's certainly been useful for me, and it's been enjoyable. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have the discipline to keep doing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Go. Are you ready, Kathy?
Well, yeah, I can build on that a little bit. When he said they're towers of excellence surrounded by seas of non-communication, that's kind of what I saw when I started on pasture. I was really, I was frustrated by such great information not actually being applied on the ground. And so I really felt like that was something I could do for my grazing community. It was something that I had the skills for. And, it feels like back in 2013 when I started this, podcasts and everybody doing a podcast, well, not everybody, but podcasts are much more common than they were back then. And I'm a writer. So doing it in a written form seemed like a good thing to do at the time. So I guess what I've learned along the way is that people actually, if you translate what the Tower of Excellence has figured out into something that a regular person can do on the ground, they will actually do it. And they will actually benefit from it. And one of the things I've actually worked at is, Tip laughed a little bit about, well, there may be some argument about whether or not it's a tower of excellence. One of the things that I've really worked at is trying to help people understand that there's a reason that people at the universities, especially the land-grant colleges, are studying the things that they're studying, and that it really reflects what producers have said they need, or an understanding of producers. So, I've really tried to, it really frustrates me when people say bad things about land-grant colleges in particular, because I really feel like those people are working hard, and those money more they had to go out and find funding elsewhere, and that impacts their research and things like that. So I've really tried to help people understand that kind of mechanism. And again, it goes to just kind of looking at the larger picture and why things are happening and what our assumptions are and our expectations, and then adjusting those based on what we're doing. So that's what I've learned.
Kathy, your background before On Pasture, was it in RCS?
No, Bureau of Land Management.
Oh, BLM. Okay.
Yeah. And I started there basically I was a volunteer building a 150-mile mountain bike trail from Grand Junction, Colorado to Moab, Utah. And from there, I got involved with the agency. I really felt like it was an opportunity to, again, help my community develop resources and economic opportunities that they wouldn't have had otherwise. And so that's kind of what I did with them. And before I started with them, I really didn't have any kind of range background at all. So pretty much the first thing I did when they hired me to be the public information officer was I went over to the range specialists and I had them take me out and show me what was going on and teach me about grasses. And in fact, over here on my library shelf is still it's the Manual of the Grasses, the 2-volume set that I got from one of those fellows when he passed on. So, yeah, exactly. So, yeah, and it's great stuff. So, I think I'm a testament to lifelong learning and what you can do if you learn how to read and keep reading and ask questions and then try and figure out how to apply things on the ground. So, I don't even.
Kathy, you mentioned you're a writer. How did you become a writer, or what would make you say that you are a writer?
What would make me say I'm a writer? I think it's probably one of my easiest forms of communication. For example, if you had asked me that question, I would really prefer to write down my answer because I'm also kind of shy. But because I feel like the information comes out my fingers better, it's just a skill that I've kind of developed. I don't know. I started writing when I was in 4th grade, and it's always been something that I wanted to do. And so it's a skill that I've acquired along the way. Does that answer your question?
Yes. No, I was curious if you had done something professionally with writing, or had done, separate from On Pasture, or had done some kind of formal training. Like some people, Emmett Jordan, for example, is a former journalist, and you see that reflected in his work. But I resemble much of what you're saying. I'm also, some people are verbal processors. I'm more of a written processor. I think better if it's coming out my fingers, and I usually do it longhand instead of typing because I find that I edit it kind of before it comes out. Whereas typing, I can type almost as fast as I can talk, and it's more verbatim recording as opposed to doing some drafting in the middle. But I do think better in writing, and I think I tend to speak more like the way I would write things as well.
Yeah,
for better or for worse.
Yeah, I'm with you.
And I'm on the other side of that coin. I guess I'm a verbal processor, and talking for me is how I kind of help myself understand what I'm thinking and what I'm learning. And I've often thought if I had all my ducks in a row, for me as a pastor, the best way for me to practice my sermons would be to preach them to an empty room and take notes as I preach, because I often find myself making connections in the pulpit that I don't make beforehand. And that's one of the things. A goal of mine is to make that a more regular practice, to put that out there in that way, and to learn. And to get some of those connections more solidly backgrounded before I unleash them into the wild. But
one of your questions, Clay, was building an online community. I feel like I have a platform at the moment, but not much community, and I'm interested in ways that the two of you maybe have been successful in building more online community and not just a platform.
Yeah, I think for me, social media has kind of facilitated that, and I don't know how it happens, honestly, other than just mentioning it on the show. And then I don't know if people go through my list of people who follow me, and then they go and make those connections themselves, or maybe I'm giving myself too much credit and those connections existed totally separately from me, but there are interesting connections I see all the time of people people in Missouri connected with people in Utah, and there's a direct connection there, as former guests and friends of former guests have become connected to each other. And I don't know if there's other platforms that they've used to facilitate those connections, but I've seen those connections happen, and it's always interesting to me, for sure.
I really think that the community goes on around me invisibly. I have the people who write in and they have particular questions, but having called On Pasture a community for a long time, people understand that we're all kind of together, even if we don't see each other. It's kind of an invisible support group. And in terms of it going on around me without me participating, I know like one group, one person wrote me and said they had put together a little On Pasture reading group so that they read and talk and get together and think about things together. But I'd have to say that, the community is largely invisible. And that's, I think, really one of the hard parts about doing these things online or digitally. It's that we don't get to see what's really happening for other people. And, so when someone, like yesterday, my husband was talking to someone that turns out works with somebody I'm working with, and she knows On Pasture and had some nice things to say about the way that I present information. And I think I don't hear that very often. And so I'm always surprised. And, those things kind of, like I said, it's going on invisibly around me, and I can see just by statistics and things what people are doing. I can see them interact on Facebook and sometimes write in comments. But again, in a way, I feel like you, Tip, where it's kind of I built a platform where people can come and read and think and then go on and talk with each other about it. And I'm kind of a catalyst, and I'm not sure I get to interact with some people, but not as much as you might imagine.
Yeah, no, I understand that perspective. I think that there's again a lot of that. You just open up the platform, and the people find each other. It's not something that I've intentionally sought to do. I don't know if that's your experience, but that's something that has just been I think a byproduct. And again, I told that story. I think even on the webinar, I was sitting at the Ranching for Generations conference and I happened to be at a table with three people from Texas, and I said, the most traffic I get is from Texas, and they're like, really? I don't know anybody who thinks like me. And so I think those online communities have become a place where people can go and find out maybe they're not crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So
and we've got the Voth book club and the Connery support group.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kathy, where do you see the readers of On Pasture? Are they in your talk? You talked about the innovators, the early adopters, the late majority, or the early majority and the late majority. Do you see, or have you been able to get back demographic information that would tell you that most of your readers are that early majority, or is it the innovators who are reading your stuff and then taking it out, or are you featuring the innovators as the content and then the early adopters are taking it out and sharing it with the early and late majority? How have you seen that play out?
I don't have necessarily demographic information, just based on comments from readers and who's reading and other things I see elsewhere. I would say that I'm presenting information from innovators and early adopters, and then the early majority people are the ones that are doing the reading. And those are, I know I have some early adopter readers because they'll say things like, well, I'm already doing all of this, but thanks for the moral support. and and then I'll have a lot of people who are saying things like, well, I'm I've changed my practices just based on what I've seen here, what I've read here, and so that's kind of what I'm seeing, and it's hard to tell if majority or laggards are watching at all. I would kind of say not, because they're probably not online either.
Yep. They're at the coffee shop complaining about prices and weather. Sorry, I didn't.
Yeah.
Are you accomplishing your goal then for On Pasture? Is that what you set out to do, to translate that information from the innovators and the early adopters to the early majority?
Yeah, definitely. And translating science into things that people can use as well, because there's a ton of great science out there, really some great research that's been done, and some stuff that's really coming up now that I find really interesting. And so, I feel like it's working. It's hard to say. Yeah. And, it can take a long time. I will be dead before before a lot of this stuff happens. After all, I look at regenerative grazing, and from my perspective, all the things that regenerative grazing is doing is stuff that we've been trying to get people to do since like the 1930s or even longer. And so, some different techniques, some different plants, some different, we have new tools like fencing, electric fencing that we never had before, but it's pretty much the same. So when people are really excited that they're a regenerative rancher, I'm just like, okay, carry on, let's keep going. Good job.
And Tip, I really appreciated your presentation on the webinar, talking about how conversation promotes deep thinking. That's just a great title and a great direction to go. How have you heard back from your audience about the ways that your content is impacting them?
Yeah, that's a good question. One of my hopes, and this was part of the thinking that led to doing a podcast in the first place, was that people would be pulling together pieces from all these wide variety of topics and making conclusions from it. Sort of like, your body digests food and breaks it down into different parts. We call that metabolism, but then the body also catabolizes, which is taking all those individual parts and putting them back together into what the body needs. I think I mentioned in the webinar that there's a fair bit of survey data indicating that some of the biggest problems in ranching, the ones that are the most difficult to put your finger on or do something about, are social. Public perceptions about ranching, especially grazing on public lands, working with other people that maybe are antagonistic to you. I recognize that for a lot of people, the financial struggles are still quite significant, but I also think that in, some of the financial issues also get addressed by thinking from a bigger picture perspective, trying to get up to the 35,000 foot view. And so I had a survey out initially to try to gather some feedback for the funding source. The Western Center for Risk Management Education, put money into this because they believed in my argument that people would make site-specific decisions and conclusions from listening to a broad spectrum of information. And so the survey allowed people to just fill in a blank with what did you do? It's hard to analyze that if you're trying to summarize survey results for a funder, but the whole point was that there aren't 4 different things in a drop-down list that we're hoping people would do from listening to the content from 2 years worth of podcasting. So the question, was essentially, what have you done as a result of listening to the podcast? And just left it open-ended and left room for people to enter 3 different things. And as I had hoped, those results were all over the board. People resolved to spend more time talking one-on-one with their range con, or they were, had set up a photo point on a fence post that they could take a picture from once a year, or they were going to think about how they could cull their herd to reduce mother cow size and potentially decrease cost of production and maintain output and revenue, and use terrain differently. The results were really all over the board, which is kind of what I had hoped for.
So
I just say,
go ahead. Go.
I love the way you think. I really enjoy listening to how you think and put things together. It's really great. Thank you.
Thank you.
To both of you, is it scary to you when people tell you they've decided to make a change on their ranch because of something they heard a guest or a contributor say on your platform?
Yeah, a little bit. I guess I've been in Extension long enough and been, spewing advice at people for long enough that I haven't worried about it too much for a while. But, especially with things that inputs that cost money, like various kinds of range rehabilitation, I think is a good example. Things like culling your herd to reduce cow size or calving a little bit later, those are pretty well proven. But if somebody's going to go out and spend several $1,000s on seed or tens of thousands of dollars on seed, a lot of those things are outside of my control, their control. You can try to reduce some of the factors, but some of those things do worry me, because you could easily throw away 10 grand and not see much come back from it if you have a seeding failure.
And I have a tendency to just listen to what they say they're going to do, what they think they want to do, and then see if I can provide them a little bit of additional information, or suggest that maybe they go talk to their NRCS person or their range con, remind them that there's funding potentially available. There's people out there to help them, because sometimes it's hard for me to know exactly how they translated something that they saw. And what their skill level is, things like that. So I try and just reinforce, yes, you should think about changes, and these are people that could help you too. So that's kind of an ongoing refrain from me.
And Kathy, back to your presentation, could you give me some examples of people that you think of as innovators in our field, and people that you think of as maybe early adopters in the fields that we are all connected to?
Well, I think everybody has heard of Greg Judy. I think he's quite an innovator in the grazing world, and people, he's working hard to share that information and move people along. But then there's people like, one of our authors is Tom Kravitz. He's out of Alberta, Canada, and he is constantly working on, how can I do more soil health? How can I, he's actually looking at, the difference. He's looking at the economics of, if I do bale grazing, do I roll them out or leave them in a big bale, and which is better economically, and which has better results for the environment and things like that. I've got a variety of authors like that. Don Ashford has been in the business for like 60 years. He's out of Louisiana. He's definitely an early adopter, and has really worked hard in his community to spread the word. John Marble. A lot of these people are actually involved in groups within their communities. And so those are the people that I interact with, that I think of in those terms.
As far as those early adopters, those innovators, one of the things that I wrote down during your presentation, Kathy, was, are we all just imposters of the innovators? We're all just looking at them, waiting to see how it works out, and then copying what they're doing.
Maybe that's okay.
Right. Yeah. No, it was not a negative thing,
Yeah, there's people who have, like, the early adopters are usually the people who have more resources, and so they can bear a risk. Innovators are often just kind of crazy people, and that's okay. And again, they're able to bear risk better as well. So yeah, I don't see any problem with kind of sitting and watching somebody and seeing how it goes. The problem I see is when people disrespect them and say bad things about them, and you should just kind of watch and see how it works out. Support them if it goes poorly, support them if it goes well, and then learn. It's they took the initiative to learn something that could be beneficial for all of us. So I think that's always a good thing.
And people have different strengths. I mean, I think there's some reasons why early adopters are early adopters. Sometimes it has to do with the ability to take risk, either, personally or financially. This James Rogers, who's with the Wine Cup Gamble, said he feels like this is one of the responsibilities of large corporate ranches that sometimes get a bad name, but some of them, are an economic whole and they have to pay for themselves. And when they are profitable or are backed up by other money, he feels like they have significant responsibility to do some of that, to take on some of that risk and try stuff that other people don't have the freedom to do because it looks too economically risky. And there's some experimentation that can happen there that other people may not be free to try. But I think there's also different kinds of strengths. And one of the criticisms that's often leveled against extension people by cynics is that those who can do and those who can't teach. I think I disagree with that. For example, somebody can be a spectacular golf coach without being a great golfer. And especially in the world of ranching, that opportunity is just not open to everybody. And I do take it seriously as somebody who's in the academic world, to be trying to be on the leading edge of what is being learned and can be learned and translating that to people that can use it. And they don't have the time to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think that golf coach analogy, sometimes the golfer couldn't tell you how to fix your swing, but the golf coach can analyze the swing, break it down into its smallest parts, and then reassemble it, kind of that catabolize analogy too, back into something that somebody else can digest in a way that they can understand. And I think that's kind of, what all of us probably are doing on some level is finding those people and giving them an opportunity to share that. And then, for me personally, that's kind of part of the reason why I started this conversation where I did. For me personally, I have rarely ever asked a question I knew the answer to. I ask questions because I want to know and because I need to learn. And, I'm still learning. Obviously, I just dropped off 3 open cows at the sale barn because I'm in a position where I got to sell them, and I'd rather add value to them, but I just can't do it right now. So, it's one of those things you still learn, and you're still continuing, as you guys have both alluded to, the process of lifelong learning. Do you have any thoughts about that, either of you?
Well, for one, the older I get, the more valid answers I see. I've got a lot fewer pat answers, to what might look like simple questions. And I think that's a good place to be. I've also found, maybe going back to, what our role interacting with some of the early adopters and the ones that are not so early in adopting, in talking with ranchers, I often find that square one is farther back than I realized. And that's not an insult to ranchers. That's a failure to, I think, know people on my part. I'll go in to a presentation prepared to do riparian grazing 501 and find that what is needed is to do some more 101 and 201. And again, I don't even like using the term basics anymore, because I think those basic things are more like fundamentals.
I guess one of the directions I wanted to go, appreciate Emmett's interaction with us, was what feedback from your communities have helped shape what you're doing. What challenges? What are the greatest challenges your communities are looking for you to help overcome?
I think it is the fundamentals, as Tip was just saying. How does grass grow? what is soil health? How do we improve soil health? All those are kind of fundamentals that I see coming up over and over again, that we need to work on. And there's always some snake oil out there that they need help with, kind of working through. Is this real? Is this not? Is it worth the investment? Is it not? Those are often the kinds of things that I see them asking for and needing help with.
And Tip, you were talking about the fundamentals, and I think the direction you were going is that those fundamentals kind of prove themselves to be weaved into all of the higher order principles and more complex ways of thinking. Is that right? Is that where you were headed with that idea?
Yeah, I think so. The fundamentals are not simple basics that we move on from and then do more complex things. It's that everything that we do is still tied back to those fundamentals. And I think it's pretty important for those of us that are involved in teaching to keep track of them, because the answers that I have regarding some of the fundamentals, whatever that might be, grazing philosophy, animal science, you name it, my conclusions about those things have changed over time. And so they do for everybody else as well. And I think it's only by continuing to talk about them and feel out the edges and challenge what we thought was true, we are able to do other stuff with it.
And it's kind of, the analogy of the tree. We talk about being out on a limb, when we're away from the fundamentals. Why are you out on that limb? Well, you're less supported by the trunk, you're less supported by the branch as it's closer to the trunk. And now you're maybe in a little bit more of an exposed and risky position because you're less connected to those fundamentals. I don't know if that's a helpful way of thinking about that.
Yeah, I think so.
And Tip, I asked Kathy while we were dealing with some connection issues, what are some of the challenges that you feel like your community is asking you to help them overcome? Yeah,
at least in the Pacific Northwest, there's definitely a lot of pressure against public lands grazing. And I think some of that's left over from legitimate abuses that happened earlier in the century. And because of the nature of most semi-arid rangelands, that can sometimes get us past the tipping point that we haven't recovered from. And so people still see the effects in places of mismanaged grazing historically. But I also feel like we're at a pretty encouraging time where I think the general public, if there is such a thing, is valuing food producers more than they did, say, 20 years ago. People are, I feel, trying to understand a little bit more about where their food comes from and how it's raised. And I think that's something that definitely, that scrutiny, I believe, will benefit rangeland-based livestock operations. I think there's a really good story to tell there, because this is one of the only sectors of agriculture where you can have your cake and eat it too, where we can produce food and still produce all of the other ecosystem goods and services that people expect from wide open spaces. And I think there's a good story to tell. And I think that is one of the things that ranchers in particular want from those of us who are in this, middle ground liaison boundary spanner space, is to both help them tell the story and, to use, our writing skills or our platforms to help get that word out. And I think there's some risk in that, at least, from an academic standpoint or from being part of the Society for Range Management. The society tried to distance themselves somewhat from the livestock industry for quite a long time to try to counter the perception that they were just a tool of the livestock industry. But if you disconnect that enough, then there's a lack of two-way communication that actually is pretty important for research, especially where we're not talking about bench science. This is quite a bit more complex than that. And so, to understand how livestock interact with landscapes and do that sustainably, even to do research on that, it requires, serious connection between the academic community and the ranching community. And so I see that as being one of my roles, to try to strengthen that connection where it has been weakened.
Building trust.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Do you guys have the experience of people who aren't connected to agriculture reaching out to you and letting you know that they're consuming your content? And I think maybe, again, kind of back to the unique position of agriculture, especially holistic management or whatever label you want to put on it, because we're talking about managing wholes, pretty much every industry could be served by better management of the whole that they find themselves entrusted with. So I don't know if you guys have had that experience of people who are not necessarily agriculturalists themselves reaching out to you and letting you know that they're consuming the content that you're producing.
Yeah, I've actually gotten emails from people who say they aren't farmers or ranchers, or they don't raise anything. They just like to read about it. And so, yeah, and that's been going on since we first started. So I don't think it's a huge number, but I know they're out there.
Yeah, not a lot. Most of what I've gotten, I would say, from people that are outside of the sphere of range science have been students who maybe have been assigned a range course, and the professor is using some of the podcast episodes as required content for the course. And students that otherwise, didn't have any background in agriculture or livestock grazing are made aware of this, this enterprise, this activity going on in our country, and they appreciate it. I have heard from several students that have that to say about it.
Yeah, and I think both of us, or all of us, recognize the unique position that we find ourselves in as far as just the world, and I think kind of the wake up call as far as the connection to your food producer has been. Do you guys think about pursuing that as a vein of content that you want to explore further, or have you seen more traffic to that content that you've already produced in that way? And how are you thinking about those things?
I'm not. I have my hands full. So, from time to time, I do include articles that help farmers and ranchers make the argument for themselves, so that if they find themselves in a position where they need to justify what they're doing or whatever, they have the material that they need. But I have my hands full, and I kind of need to stick with my little niche to keep on serving them as best I can.
Yeah, I have thought about it some. I have not done much of that to date, mostly because the podcast is still funded primarily by the Western Center for Risk Management. I've tried to stay a little bit focused on topics that, have been promised as deliverables in the grant application. I learned the first time around that those need to be somewhat general, and I would say one of the biggest challenges I've had in running a podcast is, trying to have some control over the scope and sequence, mostly just for my own ineptitude. I think I have found that getting interviews has been a little bit more opportunistic than strategic. And so I kind of end up with whatever I end up with. And, in general, have tried to keep that with the topics that I've said I would cover in the grant. And to answer your question, in this most recent grant, one of the things I wanted to accomplish was to run some content to try to help ranchers be able to tell their story, to the non-ranching world, to promote, better public perception about, especially public lands grazing. And so I'm open to ideas for how we might do that. That was the last quarter of the grant that I'm working on right now. And I'm looking for ideas to do that, to try to reach out beyond just the ranching and what I call natural resource professionals audience, and try to go a little broader, both with the listenership as well as working with ranchers to try to tell their story.
I'll think about it. Maybe I can send you something. I'll think about it.
Kathy, what challenges do you find in creating the content that you're creating? And again, I need to give a hat tip to Emmett Jordan from the Colorado section. There it was again, Colorado section for the Society of Range Management. He sent some great questions. It's nice to have a real journalist provide you with some questions when you're working on something like this. But so what challenges have you come across in creating the content that you create?
When I first started, I was just going to be a news aggregator like the Huffington Post. I was just going to go out and find the articles and rework them a little bit and pop them in. So what I found, though, was that the kinds of content that I wanted to provide didn't exist anywhere. So the first challenge was to begin to create the content. And the next challenge is that I do this every week. And so I have, I'm basically writing the equivalent of one self-help novel every 6 weeks. And that's a killer. It's quite wearing. And, I do have some people that send in information and things like that, but it can be very wearing. You're talking to me at a point right now where I'm really tired of not physically, but just mentally and emotionally from continuing the project for the last 8 years. So yeah, that's the biggest challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you actively seeking assistance in that regard, or how does that look for you?
Yeah, and I'm always reaching out to people, and people are always showing up. In fact, usually about the time that I'm just like, oh God, I can't do this anymore, someone shows up. So, it's all working out. It's just, it's kind of the up and downs of this kind of work.
Tip, what are your challenges in creating content?
Oh, pretty similar. You're trying to lock down interviews. I think you're on about a weekly release schedule. I'm releasing an episode exactly every other week, and we've been pretty successful in keeping to that. And I've been surprised at how much work it takes just to get, an hour's worth of content out every other week. Just in terms of, broaching the topic with somebody I'm interested in, landing on what we're going to talk about, getting it scheduled, making that sync with, with an audio technician, and then being able to process that in time to stay ahead of a release schedule. It's been good for me in that it requires kind of like writing discipline, where you've got to put something out on a regular basis, whether you feel like writing or not. It's been good discipline for me to just, something's got to go out, and so you get it done.
Yeah, and for me personally, the challenges I face are the time to edit, the recording, the scheduling the interviews, the actual interview thing is not as much of a challenge to me as the editing, because I do try to put out a high quality product where there aren't pauses, there aren't there aren't some of them you leave in just because you want to maintain a conversational tone. So that's one challenge. And then I think the other challenge is the monetization of it, because I see myself as basically telling people that these are a bunch of people who are living proof that you don't need all the inputs to succeed in ranching. And so basically I'm in the business of telling people that they don't need to spend money to be successful in ranching. And so how do you find somebody who wants to pay somebody to tell them they don't have to spend money? So, that.
By the way, send me some. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I'm with you all. That's the hardest part. People want to learn things, but they don't want to pay for it. So, yeah.
It's tricky. I mentioned that I'm grant funded, through the end of 2021, and I've put some feelers out for different ways to try to fund podcasting and get some sponsorships. Maybe organizations that sponsor a series of episodes and just pay for those. But I think that's difficult. You can do advertising, but there's some risks in just letting any advertising come on. And then if you're a little bit more discriminating about that, then you risk being accused of discrimination.
Yeah, that's a challenge, and I think that the discrimination part of that is a big part of what podcasting has done. Is, you always hear that from podcasters. I only endorse products that I use myself, or that I enjoy and appreciate, or whatever, however they phrase that, and so we've niched ourselves down already. Being in agriculture, and then even further being in regenerative agriculture, and then on top of the fact that regenerative agriculture is that if you treat the land right, the land will treat you right on some level. You don't need the input, so it becomes a very small slice of people who have something that they want to sell that group of people, and so you've got to either branch out outside of that regenerative space, or be content with creating free content and the satisfaction that comes from it.
Yeah. You don't want to be the Working Cows podcast brought to you by Acme Chemical Company.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Or I've actually turned down advertising, and it's a difficult thing to do, because I can't just say to them, I'm sorry, but it's snail, and I've promised people that I'm not going to tell them to buy snake oil. So if it's there on my site, so it's hard. Yeah. Yep. So I keep, we're a subscription-based service now, and I think we might make it, but I'm not sure.
Do either of you see yourself broadening away from your current platform to others to reach your goals, or to broaden the audience at all? I think today we're recording this on video, but it's got its own set of unique challenges, and so that's one example. But I feel like, me personally, I'm somewhat weekly. I've released more than an episode a week since November of 2017, but the last few months have been maybe 2 episodes one week and nothing for a couple weeks after that, or something like that. So I feel like I'm barely keeping my nose above water with audio, and then to add in another wrinkle would be even another set of challenges on its own. So,
well, what I'm doing is, at this point, we've got 2,800 articles or something in the archive. And when I sit down to write something, because I've written so much, I pretty much, and I edited everything, so I know what my content is. I'll think, I've already written this. So I'll write this, and then I'll add this over here. So basically the switch that I'm working on right now, or something a little different, is not everybody is as familiar with my content. So I'm basically curating old articles and putting them into ebooks and things like that, so that people can find them. And then, just I really like making video. And so it's hard for me to do the same thing day after day after day. So I'm actually looking at how can I do video, or how could I do a 2-minute audio story or something, just to break it up, so that I can do some other things as well, just for my own enjoyment, keep me enthusiastic.
What about you, Tip? Any changes to the Art of Range podcast in that way?
Yeah, I think my answer is similar to yours. I feel like I'm just barely approaching being successful, with an audio only podcast, and I really like that. I really like that format. The thing that I feel I need to do badly is to establish a more dynamic website, so that when people, reach that as a landing point, there's a little more there than just a SoundCloud plugin that shows the most recent few episodes. I'm actually working with the University of Arizona right now to revise the website and do something more like an old-fashioned blog, where there's an entry or a page for each episode. So there's room to, present some supporting material, other publications. Right now, we've got all of the transcripts, which are required by the university, and I have found pretty useful. Those transcripts are all on a Dropbox site, but anybody who's on a government computer is not able to access the Dropbox folders. And so I'm trying to set up, a real website, not just a landing page, where I think that will help promote a little bit more of an online community and enhance the content. But for the time being, I'm definitely happy with audio only and podcasting, and I feel like I need to succeed in doing that before considering anything else.
Yep, me too. I guess, have you guys seen or have you had opportunities afforded to you by your platform to go to in-person events, or have you heard about in-person connections being facilitated by your platforms?
Yeah, definitely. I've been asked to come and speak because of my platform. It's not definitely it's not something I'm doing right now. And I've kind of found that I'd rather stay at home. So it's probably not something that I'm going to, I was on the speaking circuit for like 12 years. And so I'm kind of done with that.
Yeah.
I like this.
I do enjoy talking to people and enjoy speaking live. And I've had a couple, like the Colorado section was going to be a meeting that I would have been in person for and was really looking forward to that. And I think there's something really significant that's lost, when we meet virtually. This technology is amazing. It's unique, and I think important that the three of us, for example, can sort of look at each other while we're talking. But when you're speaking to a larger group, if there's 115 people that are out there somewhere and you can't see them, hear them, I didn't realize until I've probably done about 3 virtual conferences of various kinds in the last month, and I'm really surprised at how much what I would ordinarily say is adjusted on the fly, by stuff that you're picking up from an audience, the composition, their age, their all kinds of things. There's just no, you've got no feedback whatsoever from an audience, and it's really difficult to try to connect and speak to people in that way. So I'm hoping for in-person connection again sometime. The most interesting thing I think that I've had happen is I was eating breakfast at the Society for Range Management meeting year before last, and somebody came up to me in the restaurant as they were leaving breakfast and said, "Are you Tip Hudson?" Why, yes, I am. He said, "I recognized your voice in the restaurant and just wanted to come say hi, and I like your podcast." And that's pretty cool. So it definitely has given me more notoriety than I deserve, for sure. But it also feels good to connect people with. I think that's one of the things that I feel like is a benefit of a podcast, is it makes people feel like some of these range science superstars who might seem inaccessible by virtue of their position or their prominence aren't inaccessible. They're normal people like the three of us who do their job and they're happy to talk to folks. And I think that's an important message to get out there.
Yep. I've had similar experiences. One of them was I was at a concert and I was having a conversation with somebody, and somebody heard me having a conversation, said the same thing, I recognized your voice. I'm like, that is weird. And then, the other thing, like the first time I gave that talk that I gave at the Society for Range Management webinar, I gave it in Alberta, Canada, and I gave it to the Holistic Management Canada annual meeting. And so there's like, all these people there, Steve Kenyon and Don Campbell and others that would be legends in the Holistic Management Canada area, and so here I am. And at that point, I'd literally done nothing in holistic management other than talk to people who had done it, and
right.
And it was super intimidating for me. And like for me, I speak every Sunday. I have usually a page of typed notes with 14-point font, so it's big. and that'll last me 35 to 45 minutes. And I was so nervous up there. I think I had more content than that written down, and it lasted me 25 minutes. And then so I went back and I tweaked it, and I added some stuff to it. And for the webinar, kind of going back to what Tip was saying, without the ability to interact with the crowd face to face, it was even shorter. Even though I tweaked it and added more to it and changed some of the lessons that I've learned, it was shorter on the webinar than it was in person, looking legends in the eye. So it is there is something lost, but it is good. It is good to have this opportunity when other opportunities aren't as readily available. So, did you guys have any thoughts going through your head, or things that you wanted to cover as far as in kind of that post webinar interaction time? Was there anything in your mind that you were hoping to talk about during that time?
I think we've kind of covered a lot here, so I'm happy.
Yeah, I think the only question that I had that we haven't asked of you yet is, I'm curious how you have ended up selecting content. Is it that you find a person that seems interesting and you target them, or is it that there's some topics that you want to cover and you go fishing for people that can speak on a topic? I think I mentioned that it's been a little bit more opportunistic for me than I had hoped for. I was hoping to be a little bit more deliberate in content, and I think we've ended up having good stuff, but it's definitely not a tight scope and sequence and, carefully chosen speakers in a sequence like I might have thought once upon a time.
Yeah. Yeah. My content is opportunistic would be a good way to describe it. Generally it's person based and not topic based for me. I find the person and then we pick a topic to discuss. I started off way back at the beginning. I think episodes 3, 4, and 5 were about winter grazing, and actually Kathy was involved in making the connection with Grant Lestuca to do the bale grazing. He turned me on to Grant turned me on to another guy that I ended up talking to for that episode. But those were my I think that's the only time I've done a series where I had 3 episodes in a row that were all related to each other, even as broadly as just winter feeding of cattle. And so since then I haven't been able to replicate that with a thread like that of different episodes. So it's I think that's a good word, opportunistic. But it's a good opportunity to let the person and what they are uniquely qualified to talk about kind of drive the content. So I haven't felt, and maybe it's just a lack of reflection too, but I haven't felt like it's been a disservice necessarily to the person speaking or to the audience to be personality driven.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you guys' time today. Is there anything, Kathy, that you've got coming up that you want to share, or what you'd like to direct people? I imagine there's quite a bit of overlap here, so people are aware. But whatever you want to share on the show notes page for today, I'd be happy to do that.
No, I don't think I have anything. I mean, people can just come and explore on Pasture. There's always the 3 free articles a month option if you're not interested in becoming a subscriber right away. We have bonus content for people who are subscribers. So those are free downloadable ebooks and other things that they can have if they're a paying subscriber. And we're kind of building on that right now. One that's coming up is a Grazing 101 ebook that we're going to do with sponsor from the National Grazing Lands Coalition. So just building some things like that along the way. And again, if people have something that they want me to write about or something that I can do better, I'm more than happy for them to get in touch and let me know, because the only way I can do my job especially well is if people let me know when I'm not doing it well. So that's mostly what I ask.
Buckle up.
What do you got, Tip?
Yeah. Yeah.
Anything you want to share, Tip, in that regard?
No, just to encourage folks to check out the Art of Range podcast. I have not been very aggressive about advertising for the first little while. I think when people go to take a look at the podcast, they want to see that there's some history and evidence that it's going to continue and it has some solid content. And I feel like we're at that point now. We just dropped episode 50 this last week. And so I would encourage folks to take a look and see if it's useful and subscribe. And I will be mentioning the Working Cows podcast as well. I don't have a giant listener base. There's probably 2,000 people that are listening regularly. But I've found that, even with that, it seems that it's necessary to advertise each episode, even though the way I subscribe to podcasts is, whatever is newest just shows up in my feed and I listen to it. If it's interesting, it seems that there's a lot of people that are still, being directed to an episode rather than just listening to it because it was there.
Sure.
Advertising seems important, and I would encourage folks to take a listen.
Yep.
Okay, let me do something for you on Pasture then. When we talk on Thursday, let's talk about that.
Sure.
Very good. Well, you're doing great work, Tip. You are succeeding in that work if that's where you're at. Are you 50 episodes every other week? So is that 2 years almost?
Correct. Yeah, we launched in October of 18, and we took a break for a month in the first summer, and then again around Christmas time in the second year. But it's mostly been every other week since October of 18.
Yeah, and that's I think I'm at around 3,500 downloads an episode after 30 days, and I'm coming up next. Well, this week. Last week was 3 years for me. So you're doing really good, and really appreciate the content and really appreciate both of you giving your time. And there will be links to all of that in the show notes page for today, workingcows.net/164. So if you want to check out workingcows.net/164, there'll be links to On Pasture and to the Art of Range podcast, and also the Colorado section for the Society of Range Management webinar series. So thank you guys for your time today.
Thank you.
That's a good opportunity. Really appreciate their joining me, and looking forward to more and future relationships with both of those individuals, and really appreciate the content that they're creating, and make sure that you're supporting that content in whatever way you can, whether it's becoming a subscriber over on Pasture or giving Tip the feedback that he needs to give the feedback to those that are standing behind him in the funding sources that he has. So go check them out and give them a follow and support them. And next week, really excited to be joined once again by Annalisa Walker. She is one of the driving forces behind Walker Farms, but we're talking to her this time about a new course that she's going to have coming out early in 2021 about online marketing and how you can take an ecosystem approach to online marketing. So very, very cool, kind of applying holistic management to online marketing, and I'm looking forward to that. And I encourage you to check out the Working Cows podcast next week, coming your way real soon.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.
Howdy, everybody. It's Clay Connery, host of the Working Cow